Well, good morning. I hope everyone's doing good this morning. I want you to imagine with me, or maybe not imagine, reminisce with me, I guess. I want you to remember, and I want you to think back on a time where you really, really wanted something. And I don't know what it is, but I just want you to think about that. A time where you really, really wanted something. Maybe it's an actual thing that you wanted, a toy or a car or a house or something that you could actually hold in your hand. Or maybe it was a relationship that you really hoped was going to work out. Maybe it was a job opportunity. I don't know what it is. But I want you to think about a time where you really wanted something. Then I want to ask you, why did you want that? And most of us probably would say that we want that because it's going to make us happy in some way. It's going to bring some kind of fulfillment to us. It's going to make our life easier. It's going to make our life better. It's going to be more convenient. There's a reason that we want things, and it's because of the promise of something better. For me, there's been a lot of things that I want, all right? And I remember whenever I was young, there was a thing called infomercials. And I don't know if people still watch infomercials. I don't know if they still make them. We don't actually have cable or satellite or anything like that in our house. And so I don't know what's on TV anymore. But I know whenever I was a kid, I loved infomercials. And if you don't know what it is, turns out it's really just a 30-minute long commercial for something. All right, they're trying to sell you something, and they do a really good job. Because I remember every Friday night, whenever it was a weekend, I didn't have a set bedtime, and I got to stay up a little bit later. And so normally I'd go to bed, but Friday night I'd get to stay up a little bit later. And after all the regular shows would go off around 10 o'clock, from like 10:30 till 5 a.m., it was nothing but infomercials. And I watched all of them. Like I loved them, and I loved seeing what they would do. I loved seeing the demonstrations and what all these like magic products were. And I remember watching infomercials for super mops that clean up any mess that you could ever imagine. I was talking to Russell during class. He reminded me of the Ginsu knife commercial where they're like cutting through the can or the leather or the cinder block, and then it still slices the tomato paper thin. It was awesome. I remember infomercials for hair in a can that you spray on, and it makes it look like you have hair where you don't have hair. And like Ron Popeil, he was awesome. The rotisserie, set it and forget it. Like I remember all the slogans and all the things. And I remember I would watch these things and I would love them. And I would think, oh man, I need that. I want that. And I would the next morning wake up and I'd go find my mom and I'm like, Mom, you're not gonna believe what I saw last night on TV. It's awesome. We have to get this. We have to have this. And most of the time she would say no. But there was a few times that I actually was able to wear her down enough that she would order one of these as seen on TV things. Now you can go to the store and you can buy them, but back then you actually had to order them from the commercial. And you had like 24 hours to order to get a certain deal, and after that you missed your chance. And so I remember ordering these products and trying them out, and like there's one time in particular. I remember we had some family visiting us, and this product that we had ordered off of the infomercial came in, and this particular product that we ordered was one of those super mops that they had shown cleaning up. Like they would squirt ketchup all over the floor and they just wipe it up, and one wipe and it's completely gone, and it's like, oh, it's amazing. And so I remember my family was here and I'm like, this is awesome. I get to show everyone this cool new mop that we got. And so the mop came in, I took it out of the packaging, and I wanted to try out what they did on the commercial. I wanted to show everyone how amazing this mop was. And so one of the demonstrations they had on this infomercial was they just cracked an egg on the floor, and then they got the mop and and it was gone. And so I was like, watch this, everyone. And so I brought the whole family in the kitchen, and I grabbed the egg out of the kitchen, I threw it on the ground, smashed it, and I got that mop and I went like that, and it was not gone. And I just wiped a few times and it was just smearing it all over the place. And so I was like, well, maybe I'm doing it wrong. I went and I read the instructions for the mop. I was like, maybe I'm not doing it right. And so, but it didn't work. And so I remember having to be down on the floor on my hands and knees, actually wiping it up with a rag and the cleaner and everything like that. And I just remember being disappointed because here was this thing that I wanted, and it was going to make my life better, and the promise didn't live up. And I learned a lesson. I learned that sometimes just because someone says something is amazing doesn't mean that it is amazing. And so I learned to be a little bit more skeptical. And that's kind of sad. That's kind of sad that at a young age, I started learning these lessons of don't trust. Eventually, I did get to a point where I found some things that would last, whether it was cars or different clothing manufacturers. I'm like, these clothes last a little bit longer than these clothes. And so I started figuring out what quality was. And one of the areas that I really found a passion for quality items was in tools. And I love tools, all right? And I love power tools. I love hand tools. I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I told you I don't have cable or satellite, so I spend a lot of time on YouTube. And I found these channels of these people using just old-fashioned hand tools, no electricity, building these things with hand planes and bit and brace things. And I love tools because there's tools that have been in existence for over 100 years, and they still work. Like, that's awesome to me, to think that there's a thing that was made 100 years ago, and it still serves its purpose. It still does the thing that it was designed to do. And so I love tools, and I also love the fact that with tools, you can build new things. Like, you can make something that was not there before. You can turn a pile of wood into a table. You can make things. And so I think that's kind of awesome that with these things, if you get the right quality ones, that they will last almost forever, and that you can actually use them to build things, right? And so I love my tools. And over the years, I consider myself to be a fairly generous person. There's a lot of things that if you need to borrow it, it's yours. You want to borrow my car? That's fine. Drive my car as much as you want. You want to borrow, I don't know what else you'd want to borrow from me. I don't have a lot of stuff, but anything you want, you can borrow. But the one thing that I'm hesitant to lend out are my tools. And it's because I know how much I love my tools. And I don't think you love my tools as much as I love my tools. And so you're not going to take care of my tools the way that I take care of my tools. And so if I lend you a tool, one, I don't know if it's going to come back in the same shape that it left. It might come back broken. It might come back damaged in some way. Or another scary thought is you might actually love my tools as much as I love my tools, and you might decide to keep it for yourself. Or you might lend it to someone else because you think J.E.'s a generous guy. He lent it to me, and so I'm sure he wouldn't mind if I lent it to someone else, and then it just wanders off and you never get that tool back. And there's this fear that if I put this thing out there, I will never have it again. All right? Because there's some things that come at a cost. And if I put this thing out there, I'm not sure if I'm going to get it back. And so there's this fear of disappointment. There's this fear of losing something that matters to me. And I think that I'm probably not the only one who has experienced this. I think that probably all of us at some point have learned one of those hard lessons of, I can't trust everyone. I'm going to be disappointed. Things are not going to work out the way that I want. And those are sad lessons. Those are sad lessons for us to learn, and they have some damaging effects on us, all right? Because as soon as we start learning, I can't trust everyone, then we start to be a little bit more careful with who we let in. And we start missing some opportunities to have relationships with people because I don't know that person very well, so they might hurt me. So it's best to keep them at a distance. Or I don't know what's going to happen if I put myself out in this area, if I try this new thing, or if I try to get something, if I try to get a job that I want. I don't know what's going to happen, and so it's probably best, I can avoid some pain if I just don't try that. If I just stay where I'm at and I keep doing the things that I'm doing, then I know that this is at least comfortable and I don't have to feel that pain or that discomfort. And those are sad lessons. But what if we didn't live like that? What if we didn't live out of that fear? What if we actually believed that things were going to be good? What if we actually believed what we hear in the Bible when we see that God is in control and that God is going to take care of things? What if we actually lived our life believing that God is going to do great things, just like He told us? The book of Psalms, if you've ever read it, I'm sure most of you have spent at least a little bit of time in the book of Psalms, is basically a collection of songs and prayers and poems that are, they're worship songs, they're worship poems that praise God and talk about how amazing God is, how powerful God is, how good God is, how just God is. And they're awesome because they talk about not just God being good in the good times, but they talk about God being faithful even in the bad times. And so there's so much in there. They're really beautiful. If you haven't spent a lot of time in there, if it's been a while, go back and read the Psalms, all right? And most of us have probably memorized a psalm or two in our lifetime. Some of us have probably read through these and used these words as a prayer at some point in our life, that we have used, we've stolen words from the Bible and we've offered them up as our own prayer. And I want to look at one of the Psalms today. It's a psalm written by David, all right? And it's one of the most famous psalms, maybe the most famous or well-known psalms. It's the 23rd Psalm. And so most of you have probably memorized that. Most of you might be able to just recite it off the top of your head without even looking. But I want for us to read this together, and then I'm going to tell you some things that I think about it. So Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Now, I point out that this psalm is written by David because we know a few things about David. We know the story of David and Goliath, right? That's one of the stories we start teaching our children at a very young age. And there's a good reason we teach them that, because we want them to know that God is bigger than any giants you face. So here's David. He's a little guy, young man. There's a giant. No one in Israel's army wants to go up against Goliath. No one wants to go in that direction because they're afraid. But David knows what it's like to be in the presence of his enemy. He knows how terrifying that can be, not just in that instance, but we read all the battles that David was in, and he knows what it's like to have your enemy pressing in on you from all sides and to be terrified, to actually fear for your life. And that's something that I think some of us probably lose. We probably have conflict in our life, but most of our conflict consists of uncomfortable conversations that we might have. And I was talking to a minister one time, and he said that he felt like Satan was just hurling these firebrands and these arrows at him, that nothing was going right in his ministry, and people were saying all these negative things, and that he was under this great attack by Satan. And someone gave him a little bit of perspective. He said, "You might think that these are the firebrands and arrows that Satan is casting, but really what this is Satan throwing little pebbles at your face. This is nothing." And so most of us, that's about as intense as our conflict gets. That's about as intense as our relationship with an enemy gets. Most of us don't know what it's like to fear for our actual lives because someone is trying to kill us. And David knows what that feels like. He experienced it a lot. And so David writes in this psalm that you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemy. That even when my enemy is pressing in on me, even when my enemy is trying to kill me, that you are still making a table for me. You're still feeding me. You're sitting down and having a meal with me. You're still providing for me, even in the darkest times. And so when David says this, there's something real behind that. And there's a reason that we tell our kids the story of David and Goliath. And it's that reason that I said before, that we want our kids to grow up knowing that God is bigger than your giants. And when I look at that story, and right now, this is Senior Sunday. I'm talking to our seniors. I'm kind of glancing over. I see a few of y'all making eye contact. This is for you right now. There is a reason that David was willing to stand up and face Goliath, and no one else was. And it's because all the other men were old enough to know better. David was still young enough and foolish enough to believe that God was going to take care of him. Everyone else had been jaded by life. Everyone else had had their disappointments. They had learned those hard lessons. They had gone through heartbreak. They had had all these troubles that have taught them that things are not going to work out well. And so I better be careful because I don't know what's going to happen. But David was still young enough and foolish enough to say, you know what? God said he's going to take care of me, and I believe it. And I'm going to go fight that giant because I think God's going to be there. And we kind of pride ourselves on wisdom and knowledge and forbearance, and all those things are good. I'm not saying that we should go jump off a cliff and just trust God to catch us before we fall. But there's something special about youth. And especially at the phase of life that our seniors are at. As they're graduating, they're moving on to this new phase of life that is exciting, and it's new, and you get to look at the world with fresh eyes that we don't get to look at the world with. People who are older, we've been burned, and so we're a little bit more careful with the way that we handle ourselves. But you guys get to go into the world bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and that's awesome. Because you get to go into the world without knowing what's going to happen. Like, you have the blessing of youth, of ignorance, and you have the blessing of innocence, and you have the blessing of big dreams. And you have dreams that are so big that there's no possible way you can ever accomplish them, but you're willing to try them anyways and trust God to make up for the rest. And the rest of us have kind of gotten to a point where we're like, yeah, that's a big dream, but this is probably why it won't work out. And we go back and we look at our experiences of failures, and we look at our experiences of heartaches and hard times that we've been through, and we kind of give up on our dreams as we get older. And we kind of take it easy and we kind of play it safe, but you guys won't do that right now because you're not smart enough to. And that's a good thing. Like, that's not an insult. You're not smart enough to know that you can't do everything. And so you're actually going to try to do those things. And that is a blessing for us. Because just like David, when he stood in front of Goliath, and thousands of men who were too afraid saw this young boy stand up to a giant, those young men were reminded in that moment that God is who he says he is. And those men followed David as he became their king. And you have the opportunity to change the world by taking big risks and by going out on faith and by believing that when God says he's going to take care of you, believing that he will. And in doing so, you have the power to remind us jaded old people, that there's something still wondrous about God. And so I'm going to challenge you to live boldly and bravely, and don't worry about failure, because you're going to fail, and that's okay. And then you just pick yourself up and you keep going, because you're at this age where you can actually do something, because you have this gift of youth and dreams and vitality. And we need that as the church, because we as the church are the conduit by which God pours out his blessings onto this world. We are the avenue that God takes to pour out all the good things that he has in store for this world. He has chosen the church to do that. And if we get caught up in the fear of what might happen, and we're not sure, and so we're not going to take a step, we're not going to take a risk, then we limit what God is able to do through us. And we need you to remind us that God is big, and that God is wonderful, and that God is amazing, and God does what he says he's going to do. So live boldly and live bravely, because we are the church. We are the plan. We're the way that God brings these blessings into the world. And if we live out of a fear of limit, then we're missing an opportunity. And we live in a world full of limits. We're limited on how much money we have. We're limited on how much time we have. We're limited on how much we can do. There's a world of limits that we put on ourselves, but in heaven there are no limits. And we are the place. This is the place where heaven touches earth. And all that limitless grace and goodness and blessing and amazingness comes through us, not because of how good we are, but because of how good God is, and that he chooses to use flawed and broken people to do things that they never could have done on their own. And there's probably some of you out here who may be sitting and thinking, I've never actually tapped into that goodness. I've never decided to try to be bold and brave. I've kind of played it safe. Well, there's good news. You don't have to do that anymore. You get to live out of the limitless richness, the limitless love that God is pouring out into this world, and you get to live fearlessly and go into the world and do amazing things, because people who are crazy enough to think that they can actually change the world, only the people who are crazy enough to think that they can do that are the ones who actually do it. And so, get a little crazy. Trust God to handle the things. Step into big things that you can't handle on your own, knowing that God is stepping into it with you. And if you want prayers today, prayers for boldness, we're going to have a place where you can come down here up front. We're going to have shepherds out in the back where you can go and have people pray over you. Pray God's boldness into your life. If there's anyone out here who has not accepted Jesus as their Lord and their Savior, who gives them the Spirit, who gives them that power to go out and to do amazing things, we're going to have an opportunity for you to do that too. You can come down here whenever we sing this next song, and we're happy to talk with you about how you can do that, how you can get into a relationship with Jesus. And all that's going to be available, and we ask you to take advantage of it. To don't live in fear, but to be bold and step out in faith and do something amazing, because God is enough. God is not the infomercial mop that promises something and doesn't deliver. God, when he makes a promise, he delivers. And we get to live out of the confidence of that promise, and it's a great place to live, I promise you. So if you need any of that, we ask you to come forward as we stand and sing.